A more practical context. We have invited here Madle Lippus, who is the Deputy Mayor of Tallinn and is responsible for urban planning issues here in Tallinn. And to start off this program, I will give a quick word to Madle, who will maybe say a few words.
Yeah, I will sit here then.
No talking and standing.
Yes, it's not the event. But I'm really happy to be here to talk, not so happy to talk about the housing crisis, but I think it's a topic we have to address. It's for sure visible also here in Tallinn, and we have to address it somehow. Also, the question of affordable housing is important in Tallinn as the prices have risen so quickly, and in a way or in one way or another, we are in lack of housing of reasonable pricing. So I'm hoping to hear inspiring examples today that we can, and the experiences we can take into account also in Tallinn. We are in the middle of changing the way we think about social housing also in Tallinn. Till now, it's been mostly building separate houses. If we talk about affordable housing, but one thing we've seen that it's not always working well, because there's like special spots we are building them. They might not be in a good location in city-wise, but also if we talk about growing segregation in Tallinn, then affordable housing should be something that also addresses this problem. But I think we're going to address all those questions more afterwards. It's going to have like a small, let's say, round table, yes, with a table. And I'm going to finish now and give Sarah will be the first one, I guess.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you to invite me here today. Today we speak about social housing, and I want to tell you what is social housing in Italy and what we have done. Before, just 2 words about who I am and about my company. I'm responsible for social housing in an investment banking that is founded in 1980 by Enrico Macchi and other partners. And today Banca Finiti is one of the most active investment banking in Italy. Sorry. And we work in corporate and investment banking, structured finance, and asset management market. I work in the asset management company of the bank. Finint investment asset management company manage equity, securitization, and real estate funds with 3.7 billion assets under management. We are more than 60 professionals, and we manage more than 30 funds. In particular, I work in the real estate department, where we are more than 30 professionals with an important team of architects and engineers. We invest in different products and different fields of real estate, We invest in office, logistics, hotellerie, commercial and social housing, and now also student housing. Okay. Okay, now I would like to give you the meaning of some terms that I'm going to use in my presentations that could help you to understand better. Okay, we have the public popular building that are the property built by the Italian state for creations of houses to be rented at favorable economic conditions to poor people, to Italian poor people, so people that not have income or very, very low. Then we have the social housing. Social housing is the supply of houses and the services at affordable price for people that have an income, but they can't find a house in Italy at the private market because the high price of the house. But at the same time, they can't get a house in the public popular building because their income are too high. So these people in Italy have an income too high for the public popular building and too low for the private market. So this is the problem. Then we have Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, that is a joint stock company, 70% owned by Italian state and 30% owned by banking foundations. Then we have CDP Asset Management Company, that is the asset manager company owned from Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, was established in 2009 and manage the Fondo Investimenti per l'Abitare, that is a close real estate fund of funds that invest in other funds with the task to improving the social housing in Italy. So I say that the social housing consists in the supply of apartments and services, because it's not only apartment, it's also services with affordable prices addressed to people with a medium low income. The requisites to join a social house building are absence of residential property ownership and maximum family income that is defined by regional law. And then people should have residence or should work in the municipality where the building is located. We start with the social housing in 2008, when there was the most important regulatory about social housing, the EM of 2008, that gave us the definition of social housing. Then we have the DL of 2008, called the house plan, that give us the opportunity to use the real estate funds to improve the social housing. And then in the DPCM of 2009, that define and regulatory the operational of the national funds of social housing. So I want to explain the system. In Italy, we have an integrated system of funds. We have a national fund called Fondo di Investimenti per l'Abitare, managed by CDP Asset Management Company, and with some shareholders that invest in the funds 2 billion of euro. These shareholders are banks, insurance company, pension funds, and the MIT, that is the Ministry of Infrastructure and Transport, so it's the Italian state. This national fund invests in some local real estate funds that are managed by local asset management company, and in these local funds there are some public investors, because there are the FIA, and there are some private investors like bank, insurance company, local public authorities, and constructions company. The local investment funds have the task to improve the social housing in the different Italian territory. So today we have 30 local real estate funds managed by 9 asset manager company. We invest about 3 billion euros in social housing. For this, the CIF could be considered in Europe the third most active intervention of impact investing. We built 205 interventions for a total of 20,000 social housing. In our social housing building, we pay a lot of attention to energy efficiency in order to reduce the cost of energy consumption, so affordable price and a reduce of energy consumptions. We avoid consumption of land, because Italy is an old country, and over the year we have built in almost all the Italian territory. Now our city are full of disused building, so we try to redevelop this building, to transform this building instead to use new territory. Then we try to use renewable energy, like solar panel, because in Italy we have an important natural resource that is the sun. So we try to use as most as possible the solar panels, photovoltaic, geothermal system, and we pay a lot of attention in the quality of finishes of the accommodation, to give an house of quality to the people. In the building, we used to put a different type of apartments with different dimensions. We have 2 rooms apartment that are about 50 square meters, that are preferred by young people because are the cheapest, and usually this typology is the most numerous in the building. In this slide, there are 2 important elements of social housing. One is the social housing convention, Each building of social housing is the object of social housing convention signed by the fund, the real estate fund, and the municipality where the building is located. And in the convention, we define the maximum price at which the apartment could be rented. So we had another important element that are the social and property manager. The social and property manager is a very important figure in the social housing in Italy. It takes care to all the technical problems of the building, and he has the important task to create a cohesive community between the tenants and try to solve the problems through the tenants. Furthermore, support the asset manager company implementing areas and give support to tenants to solve their financial problems. Okay, my company works in social housing since 2012, and we developed free social housing real estate funds. The FIA invest in our funds and invest 158 million, and we invest total 235 millions. We put together some public investors with some private investors. One of the most our important funds is the Houses Sociale Friuli Venezia Giulia that invest in the northeast of Italy. With the fund, we built 670 houses, and we are building now a student housing in Trieste with a total of 370 rooms for off-site students. The main investor of these funds are CDP through the FIA Real Estate Funds. That is the main investor with the 80% of the equity of the funds. Then we have the Regione Autonoma Friuli Venezia Giulia, that is the main public local investors with the 8% of the equity of the funds. And then we have the local banks. In these funds, we have also a lot of private investors as the construction company. This is one of the most important projects we built in Trieste. This is a project of redevelop of an industrial building. Before this building was a company that produced paper, and the structure was built in 1957 and disused in the 19th. In 2016, the fund purchased the building, and after deep remediations, the fund developed 83 flats and 2 big common space for share the activity. The project aimed to respect the history of the building And so we can't demolish the building, but we must readapting it for residential use. Another important project that now is under construction is the redevelopment of disused barrack in the center of Udine. The project is called Experimental City and was promoted by the municipality of Udine. And the fund will build 76 social houses. This project took part of a call for a project named Bando Periferie, launched by Italian state, and we achieved a public financing. It will be a real urban revolution through a deep remediation that will give new life to the district with the new social activities, new residential units, new shop and sport areas. The other very important funds for us is Fondo Housing Sociale Trentino that invests always in north of Italy. We built 500 houses and other 16 is under construction. So we have finished the investment period. We invest about 113 millions. Here the most important investor is always FIA. With the 60% of equity, and then we have the second investor is the Provincia Autonoma di Trento, that is also the promoter of the fund, and is an investor with the 20% of the equity, and is a is a contributor of the fund with a non-repayable grants. One of the most important projects of this fund is called Ex Marangoni Rovereto. That is a redevelopment of a disused industrial area in the center of the city. In the area where were old buildings belonging to Marangoni Meccanica. That is an industry that produced machinery for rubber vulcanization. The old building complex were disused in 2007 and the area was abandoned and contaminated. In 2017, the Housing Sociale Trentino Fund signed a purchase agreement, and in 2021 the new building were completed. After the signing the preliminary purchase, we have a longer period of negotiation with the local public administration until the end of 2018, when we signed the urban planning agreement. Then we start the remediation phase, and at the end of 2019 we start the construction works. The volume of the buildings was approximately 19,000 cubic meters. From an environmental point of view, it appears that the roofing of the production buildings was made by the asbestos cement slabs, and that the subsoil was affected by presence of hydrocarbons. Furthermore, during the phase of remediations, we found tanks that had been buried, still full of hydrocarbons and oils. So the remediation phase lasted more than 6 months. The ex-marangoni are made of solid X-ram plywood. We started to use the wood for construction only in the last few years. Maybe you in Tallinn, no? We don't use wood for construction? Okay.
I will talk about it.
We started some years ago. This technology involves the complete construction, starting from the ground floor, with the construction on site of the floor. Stance of using wood as a construction material are, first of all, the reduction of construction time, since the wood is a light material, and each element is easily transportable and manageable on site. The wood is renewable and recyclable. The wood is an excellent thermal insulator and a good acoustic insulator, so help to reduce the energy consumption. And the wood structures have an excellent resistance to seismic actions. The firms have the task to construct at least the 10% of the houses with using these materials, and we built the 25% of the flat using this material. This particular project employed the wood coming from via a storm, that is a storm that affected the north of Italy in 2019, and we use the wood coming from the trees fallen. So now, in this area there are 68 social houses, new commercial areas, and 5,000 square meters of public park. And we improve the area's viability with the new bus stops and the cycle and walking path. In the project there are also some smart solutions. We have some environmental solution and social smart solution. We have a smart irrigation system, urban gardens, bike sharing, and electric car charging area. And then we have also some social smart solutions that are the book crossing facility and the library of object where people can share some object. Then we have a smart access system through a digital key managed by a smartphone application that improve the security level of the building. And we have an area dedicated to the smart working and free Wi-Fi. Then there is a smartphone application to use this smart solution. And the smartphone application have also the task to get easier the communication between the tenant. So I don't know if I have other times or 4 minutes. So very slow, very quickly. Okay, yes. Very quickly, I give you some information about other projects in Italy that are not project built by my company, but by other Italian company. One is the social village Cascina Merlata in Milano, that is a residential complex and is a part of a more vast redevelopment project. They built about 700 apartments, and before in this area there was the Expo in 2015. And during the Expo, around 4 apartments are offered for rent to people working in Expo. Today they reconvert this apartment and for social housing. Then we have another project always in Milan. I think this is one of the first projects of social housing in Italy. Borgo Figino is a complex of 321 apartments in energy class A, that is the higher in Italy, with an investment of about 57 million. The houses have an average area of about 110 square meters. And the project was developed with Fondo Immobiliare Lombardia, always fund invested by the FIA, always a part of integrated fund, integrated system fund. The last one is the Corti Perugine. It's a project located in Perugia, so in the middle of Italy. Is the regeneration of an industrial area disused. It was tobacco industry. The complex of 27,000 square meters is located in the center of the city, and now there is a total of 171 flat, always in energy class A. So now I finish.
Thank you.
Thank you to you.
Right on time. So,
No, this is good. Thank you. So we're gonna do a next presentation on top of this one really fast, and then all the questions that already raised, I guess, during this presentation, and also during mine, then we would do the Q&A in the end. But I think I would be extremely contradicting to what you were to your approach, because that is really how to build up a system, and now I'm approaching this as an architect or an artist, and then try to find both ends of it, like pushing the envelope on both ends, and then hopefully by the end of tonight we could synthesize something out of it. But the housing crises are here and needs to be encountered. So, but I think first of all, instead of fastly populating livable units, we need to ask how we want to live together. And this question is something that we have analyzed in our research unit in architecture department called BAC, means Timber Architecture Research Center. At the same time, of course, my practice in part is also dealing with that.
So I guess tonight I would like to show you some examples of how we are mapping and tracking the special qualities of slender apartment research project that is currently ongoing. And why I'm mentioning those both ends as a practicing architect and also as a research in office is to show that that this is what we're doing, very much a practice-based research. And that's also the method that that I built my PhD on, like way how I analyze the work is through the practice while I'm doing research with it. I would like to discuss 5 points. 5 points of departure that we have on slender research, and but first of all, trying to connect it back to the historic context of Tallinn, exploring the methods of designing together, creating design systems and testing them, trying to reach the optimum use of material, which means zero waste mentality in construction, and above all, connecting people and the community literally and mentally with the space and through the space. So the current context, first just to start with, is like why we ask you to be here is just because we have quite a fruitful ground to start constructing out of timber, but I think there's too little good examples on how we do that in urban dense areas. So first of all, as mentioned before, the EU statistics also show that we are in the middle of housing crisis, and the rents are going up slowly but surely, but the housing prices are like as we love to do that in Estonia, we like to buy apartments, not to rent them, and these are going up really sharp. So these are EU statistics, but also it's the same thing in Estonia. So the latest ranking is that this average square meter price is around 3,000 euros, and we're not even, and then we're questioning like how we can afford that, how we're not talking about social housing, but affordable housing, how a firefighter, a teacher, how they can live in an apartment that the square meter price is above the 3,000. So I guess what we are looking for is not exactly, maybe in Estonian it's not called the social housing, it's more like how we can construct affordable living units. But there's also everything that, like to all the negative examples, there's always positive ones. I really like that this year Mies van der Rohe Award reviewed the 5 finalists, that more than half of them actually dealt with social housing or affordable housing, or how to bring the community, how to build up together the system where they will live in. And this is a social housing project from Spain. There's also this Baugruppe method, where 42 stakeholders combined the forces and created an apartment building in Kreuzberg to fight the gentrification. As we know, in Kreuzberg is a huge problem in Berlin. But also finding new activities and programs what could be shared among the owners of the apartments. And I think that's the beauty of building bottom-up as methods, so you can define everything from the very beginning, and that's something also that we want to work on. The second premise, like the context of Estonia, is the timber prefab industry. That we are the biggest exporters in Europe per capita. And I guess that doesn't come as a surprise, but I just wanted to point it out, especially that we are exporting a lot. But I'm trying to find ways how we could much more also construct here. Because Estonian timber industry, or more specifically Kodumaja, was connected to the world tallest at the time Bergen apartment building construction. And in Estonia, we recently constructed a first CLT apartment building in Põlva. It's sold out for now, but the fact is that they needed to have a showcase that we can construct multi-story buildings with CLT in a dense urban area. So this is in Põhjala, it's the south of Estonia, but I'm sure there would be better examples coming up in Tallinn as well. One of them may be Slender. And the third premise is actually like questioning the question how we want to live together. Do we want it to be stacked in a box on top of the box inside of the big box? As you know, we have certain areas in Estonia that could be considered doing that, the Soviet housing blocks. And I think what I want to ask is like, what if the Louis Kahn asked what the brick wants? I'm asking what the trunk, timber trunk wants. Like, does it really wants to be concretized and made a panel again, meaning just translating the one material to the other? Or should we find new ways of, or new forms, new spatial qualities that are actually co-working with the plasticity of the material, timber, and how much differentiation we can create within the housing block. So that's why we start in uni always in the third year with the third-year students of creating their own system, like some elements or blocks that you can combine, and then next semester we grow into a large scale 20,000 square meter project with it. And then these two methods, meaning starting with creating a system and then arriving to livable units, is something that the duality that we always do. So, discussing the local context in this research, I wanted to quickly explain how we arrived to a Slender apartment building name. So, the research is questioning what has changed in the last century, in the last 100 years, where we used to construct the Slender apartment buildings a lot, more than 85% in early 20th century were all timber housing. And then at Soviet times it was abandoned because you were not allowed to construct out of timber. And now, a century later, we're asking, like, can we, if there would be metamorphosis for timber, what and how it should look like. So Slender was first Estonian mayor of Tallinn, but he was also an engineer. And during his rule, he actually asked to be, for the workers who were coming from countryside to city center, to be constructing cheap housing for them, and it's called the Slender project because at his rule time there was most of it populated. And it was, as I said before, 85% of all the buildings that were constructed were actually timber buildings. So we arrived to a Slender, meaning that we assembled a dream team last year with technical university researchers and Estonian Academy of Arts researchers, and the aim was to have all those problematics that we have, or like the reasons why we don't construct in timber, like the engineering part, like how many stories you can actually construct with timber, the fireproofing, the acoustics. Like, if we could conquer all those problems or problematics, maybe we can also show with our case study or with our research project that we can go further. So that's why I call it Dream Team, because we really picked from every field somebody. And hopefully what the Slender project or Slender building could be doing is have a bigger inclusion of community and creating like alternative building plans, or actually creating a system that could adapt to and create high quality spaces. So historically, I'm quickly going to go through the Slender buildings because some of you might know it, but just for Sarah. So the 20th century, the early 20th century, that was a time when most of the Kalamaja area, also Kassisava, was densely built and populated with those lender buildings. Actually, until 1910, from 20s and 30s, it was mostly already the Tallinn type of building that had a that had a stone core in the middle for fireproofing reasons. So what I like about the lender project is the fact that it's always adjusted according to the needs and possibilities of the locals, meaning that they assembled families together who would buy the project and would start constructing it. And the material was lightweight. You didn't need any machinery for it, even if that wasn't even available, I guess. But you would also you would know the material, because on the countryside they were log house mostly, and you could adjust your project according to what was going on. Meaning that what you could afford space and money-wise, material-wise. And also, true to that, actually, Estonians became the landowners, because that was the first time in the city center where Tallinn, or like Estonians moving from countryside to the city center, became the landowners. And this is the electricity box in the bottom. Even that was made out of timber. The plans were really flexible. So again, showing just some few of them. But what I like about it also, the fact that it's adjusted, or you can have a discussion how many spaces you want to share, and where they're located, meaning that there was really like a discussion among the families of shared areas, what is public, what is semi-public, and what is private in these cases. And these are like some of the examples. You might have seen much more of them, but the fact that there were mostly 2-story, but there's also 3-story cases of it. There's like corner scenarios, etc. So all those modifications that happened within the plan makes me argue that the lender buildings were not standardized buildings, as rigorous, for example, as the Soviet building blocks that you all know, but is much more of a system that was framed by the activities and the needs of the owners. So another thing that we're looking at is like how can we design together? Who are the partners, and what are the contemporary examples that can, contemporary methods that can allow that? I always like to bring Gaudi into the game, because you might know the Sagrada Familia, that he actually didn't design the form of it, but he was form finding it. And those sandbags that were hanged there were actually making the form of the perfect arch that could be then used in a mirrored condition to create the space, to create the Sagrada Familia. And in the same way, like all us, the users or the inhabitants of the building, could be one of those sandbags, and we could adjust the perfect network that is, or we could adjust the network that is given to be according to our needs and necessities. So in the same way, we look at our pylons, and I just tend to bring that as an example, because here you can see how the needs of the structural engineer, the architect, also the builder, that are constantly running. So meaning that all those are not 6 digits, but they are much more. So this is the new one, but they're much more of a framework of how far it can go, so it will be still acceptable, for example, to architect or to an engineer, so that all the forces inside are capable of doing. So this we just finished last week, so this is rather new. But basically making those pylon stands, I call them dancing, because it sort of shows how much of flexibility it has inside, is what I hope also the social housing to be one day. So it's not like a fixed plan, but in every scenario it's a family of plans, family of different organizations of what the social housing could be, or what the partner building could be, and it should never repeat itself. It should react to the condition and the context. And in the same way, we looked at the students in Kruli quarter last semester. There was like 9 hectares. It used to be an old steel factory, and on the back you see the Tallinn Old Town, and this street area, like facing the Volta Street, was actually asking for 5 apartment buildings, 3-story high, but they were facing the old typical Tallinn building that were constructed in 1910s to 20s to 40s actually. And then we asked the students, what are the things that you want to combine in this scenario, and then they were like saying, okay, we need to put the working and living together, but in geometry-wise, they have to be totally distinguishable. This should your working space should not be in your apartment, inside of apartment, but it should be squeezed between the buildings. So those small spaces that were usually used, or thatched roof spaces that were used in one way in a working space, in an upside way, then it would be turned down in the rooms. So the geometry of space would guide you to understand which space is made for what. Or the question of privacy: how can we walk? How can we pass apartments in a way that you wouldn't look in? So this scenario is showing how we can have an entrance to the bottom, but on top where you have your window that no one can ever pass, and you have the full privacy, so you don't want to actually share anything. And then you would have this row of buildings that share only the outdoor corridors or the walkable areas, and these are the living units that are then formed as a U shape. Or accessibility. Every community decides its own point of departure, but this one, for example, had said that you need to access with the wheelchair or with the trolley or whatever to every floor, and this is something that also is for the community to decide what it is. So, if we need to set up a designing system, we need to know what are the initial ideas that needs to be embedded. I think this time, and I love to show this cartoon, because I think these times are over, where the architects were crumbling paper and getting a building out of it. I think I'd like to quote my partner in crime, Siim, who always says that we need to crumble polygons instead of paper, and to be much more aware what the material logic, what the systematic logic, and also the needs for this geometry is. So, for example, this is the slender building that we're currently working on. What are the underlying ideas? And that's why we always, with students, we set up with a meta grid, or the grid that underlies everything, where we can insert the core. We put slabs that are constantly moving upwards and helix-wise. We have an outdoor structure that is also arriving from the grid, and then these colors are pointing the possible apartment separations, but they don't have to be like that. And also the facade that deals with the shading allows you to create growing areas in there. So I think the metagrid has become a sort of a bounding box, the framework where the actions could be made instead of the digits. So the zero waste mentality is something that we have come across in a lot of research. This is one example where we had the biggest CLT producer in Estonia said that 10% of all the material goes to waste, because the architects always use the big boards where the windows and doors are cut off instead of making smaller pieces. So this is like the sort of the warehouse situation there, and they ask if we can work with it. And this is, for example, an example of a door where we make our own Lego piece out of it. And combining it with joinery that has no male or female side, but rather unique method, then that could be then grown in all the directions. That is usually the problem of this system. So these are, for example, the elements of the bus station that we constructed in end of 2020. That are all. This is all made out of those industry residues and leftovers. So you can really see the doors and the windows inside here. And this, I mean, and all the stripes in it, they actually show that you can grow the system further on. But this system really allowed to make walls, ceilings, seating areas, opening of the windows, etc. So I think that's something that sort of the grid allows, or creating a system allows, to what kind of architectural qualities and programs and necessities could be taken out of the system itself. And arguing for the spatial qualities. I think there's some points that we definitely want to convey with the Slender project. One thing is material honesty. So this is the rendering from the inside of the Slender building, where you can really see the CLT boards that the structure is made out of. Meaning similarly to what we saw in the bus station, that those qualities, this structural membrane, I mean, because timber could be a facade, outer facade, right? It could be the interior finish, but it also could be a structural one. So instead of having 3 different ones that if you usually have, if you have not a material structure, what we want to skip the interior finish and say that the structural part, structural elements of the building could be or should be actually visible. So you don't have to put the gypsum board on it and hide it away. So that's the material honesty, and then hopefully that would also educate the people to understand the space better. Various room heights. This is, maybe it is more like a real estate developers. It's a good argument, you know, that the apartment is 3.65 ceiling height. I mean, actually it's 2.6 most of the time, but you would create culminations, like a spatial differentiation. So you would understand that the kitchen and the bedroom, they could have a lower ceiling, but there should be a higher point or gathering, a meeting point, and for example the living room in a height of 3.6. And this is actually a really small apartment, like a 30 square meter apartment, but it still has those hopefully special qualities. And that's an 8-story study on a Slender building where we actually show how the helix system continues to grow as a spiral, and every step is 1 meter further high. So that allows us not to look at the building or not look at the apartment as how many square meters you want to buy, but it's more a question of how many meters of the facade you want to get. And then you say like, okay, I need 50 meters. So you can decide on how far the mid wall is going. So these walls, the green walls here, are actually showing that this could be turned and changed. So something also to work against the gentrification. So if you have a family that, I know the kids move out, do you need to move out of Kalamaja, or do you actually can adopt your living unit and make it still affordable for yourself, and you could continue to live with your community that you have lived for so long. So yeah, this is one thing that we look at, adaptiveness of apartment sizes. I mean, the energy production is definitely common ground for everybody. I guess you can't design nowadays if you don't produce energy or if you don't have energy efficient buildings. So this is something that I just want to point out, that there's all those facade lamellas are in a perfect direction towards the south to gather the 43 degrees, to gather all the possible energy. And the fifth thing, the facade, is something that we are also now tackling in Tallinn Architecture Biennale. So can we use the facade as a new route, a new way to get to the rooftop, evacuation staircase from apartments, a growing area to have your own crops or whatever you want to grow in there. So basically, can we activate the Põhjala facade to be much more than to be an alternative route to your apartment, but also to be much more than it usually is asked to be. So we call it a tacha wrap. As we know, the tachas are moving, or they're pushed further and further away. The area around airport was just recently taken down. There's areas in Maardu, in Jõelähtme. They're all being pushed away. So we are wondering if we could bring tachas back in vertical order and have all those small qualities, like the harvest pods, the garden gates, the resource collectors, the collective gardens, have all those elements embedded inside of the building facade. And we also are raising a question like, can we look at the old Soviet housing blocks with a crate, ask them if we could create the firewalls, because there's no windows there, right? If we can make the firewalls sort of like a New York-like escape route, add there the pods where you can grow your crops, your food, and then add the lamellas for safety, but also for the energy production, and also activate the rooftop. So that's a tacha wrap that is currently under construction. I would go after this lecture, go back there and start planting. We have an opening in Architecture Museum this Wednesday, so you can go and you can try it out, the ladders and everything inside there as well. So this is a one-to-one mock-up of a tacha wrap facade of a slender building. But in general, I hope that this slender research is taking us further towards the spaces that we need, the qualities and the questions that are raised, like how we want to live together, and also discussing if there's new functions, new qualities, new ways of thinking. In order to reach the spaces that actually architecture can provide. So I think it's really important to arrive to space before we arrive to standards, and before we start creating new rules or laws how the social housing, affordable housing, everything needs to take place. We need to let the space to tell us what it can actually provide. So I think it's I think these bullet points hopefully will help us to go in a direction that the affordable housing is there to provide new spatial qualities and also new understanding of what the communal space could be. Thank you.
First, thank you very much for your presentations. It was really interesting. I'm quite tired of following it all. It was sometimes so heavy or so information-packed. But I tried to clear up my mind and start asking interesting questions. But I also hope that all you will have some questions. I will ask a first few of mine, and then the floor is actually open. But what I firstly wanted to clarify is what Sille already mentioned a bit, that what it is exactly, and it's not that, well, it's not a very spatial question or a spatial issue, but the thing about terms we use, because firstly, Sarah, you were talking about social housing, but you were more talking about affordable housing, and actually I think, well, what you mean is actually the same. You are both talking about real estate, that like people who don't have that big income and maybe don't have don't own real estate could afford. So am I right, Sarah? That's actually also what you were talking about, like affordable, like a real estate with affordable price.
I think it's more or less the same. I think we have talked about a new way of residential, new way of living the building. Sometimes we can have discounted rent. Other times we can have market price. But you have some, I think the important thing is the way to live the building and the possibility to have not only an house but also some services with the house. And in Italy, for example, all this kind of residential have the social manager. That is a key figure for me in this building. Also in affordable, but in social housing, but also if we speak about student housing, senior housing, co-living, etc., because they try to create a community between the people that live the building.
Yeah, thank you. So it's what you mean with the social, it's like community orientated. It's I think it's mostly important here as the most of the public is Estonian, because in Estonia when we say social housing, it's actually another term that we mean housing for people who can't cope with themselves. And affordable housing, I think, is more what you mean with social housing. So, but it was just to clarify also, I think more, actually even more in Estonian what we are actually talking about. Yeah, I think it's in Estonia and the social housing it's like munitsipaalmajad, or even we can say taskukohane elamine, because if we say sotsiaalmajad,
maybe it's the same of our public.
I don't know.
Yes, I think it's quite the same.
And what actually really interested me about this system you were talking about, Sarah, is that how did it start that you have like a private fund being a partner in building social housing? Because in Estonia, it's like mostly municipal business. We've had some incentives also from the state, that they have said that it has been also more like a project-based, that for those years we have money for you to build some social or affordable housing. But in Tallinn, it's like Tallinn's own business or own interest that we have those housing, this municipal housing. So how did you end up with having those private funds in the project, and how does it affect the outcome? Does it have like what are like its pros and cons?
It was not easy, not easy to find private investors. But I think the key was the role of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, that is not total public, is public for the 70%. And usually in Italy is a guarantee of success of a project. And I think this help asset management company to find also private investors. Then all our projects have target return, target yield that is in line with the market yield. The most problem for the private investor is the duration of this project because the duration of the fund is very long, it's 20-25 years. So the private investor should stay invested in the fund for a long time. And to solve this problem, we decided to sell a part of the building. So we have a mix on the building. We have a part of the building to be rented for 8 years, and a small part that we sell immediately, and another part that we sell after 8 years, another part that we sell at the end of the fund. In this way, we can return to the private investor before than to the public investors.
But they can't decide where the building is situated or how the community project is, or how the project is built up. It's mostly just they are just funding it without.
No. Usually we develop the building. I'm not sure I have understand the question.
My question was that do the private investors also have a word to say on how the project is going to be? That where is the house that is going to be renovated situated, or what are the percentages of different types of flats you are developing?
No, they can decide. They put the money into the funds, and it's the asset management company that decide where to construct the building, which are the tenant, is the asset management company that find the tenant, find the building, make the project with the professionals, and the investor just invest and nothing else.
Thanks. Sille, you said that you have one of those, or that Slender project is in work already, and that you're working on it. Does it mean that it's still like a research project, or are you actually already starting to build one somewhere?
Gold.
How interesting.
It was actually it was a project that came to our office in the beginning, but realized that we can't just construct another apartment building that would follow all the rules and standards that were given already, and for that reason it was essential to take it to academia or make a research project out of it, and curate the team that could help us to actually pass with the fire standard, pass the fire standard guy, and all the others that we know that are usually the big red stop signs in the process of making or getting the construction permit. So in that sense, it used to be definitely a building that has a site. It still has a site, and the client still has a huge plan to start constructing it very soon. But we are finishing we tried to get as far as getting the schematic design into together by the end of this year to start the process of getting the permit. And this is going to be the funny one. But I think it's the fact that I hope that city of Tallinn would see this as a possibility for them to develop as well. What are the current laws and restrictions in construction? How many parking places we need? What kind of regulations? Why there's, for example, an 8-meter width between the buildings for fire standards? Not even a fire guy would understand that, because this is a law that came across one day and became a law. So
I guess it's even a state law, not a city law.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think there's like a lot of things that could be questioned, and something that academia will hopefully to tell you all to question the brief, always question the brief, and question everything that is given. And then if you can prove otherwise, you can pass and you can make the changes. If you can't prove otherwise, you have to continue with the brief. So we're hoping to get it into a point that where actually we could change some rules and laws at the current ongoing.
It's really interesting to hear that there's actually a real estate agency that is willing to wait for so long before they can start constructing. But in a way, I'm really happy because we need also these kinds of research projects that actually can have an outcome in the real world. So I think it's really, really interesting. But what I wanted to ask you about this site, because you were also, well, the first point you were making was about context, and that is important. So how is, what is the role the context plays, or where would it be then situated? I don't know the exact address, but just, is it like in a suburb? Is it even in Tallinn? Is it somewhere outskirts?
No, it's quite in the city center. It's close to Kalevi main station, stadium, but what the context plays is the fact that there's like the certain directions of views, the entrance scenarios. Where is the south-facing facade? Where I create all the balconies? What are the owners? Because we have already one owner, and he's the client, and he said he needs on top of everything, he needs to have his own loft.
The social housing loft.
Yeah. So he's not asking for. As I said, like we're already discussing, like how many meters of apartment you want, right? Not how many square meters. So he said he wants to have a full turn. So that's the rooftop for him. But actually, I have to quickly mention that this is not a real estate developer who's doing this. Is actually the owner of the Estonian biggest CLT company, and they need this as a good example of how come across or how to pass the solid wall that we have in front at the moment, like why there's too little of those CLT or glulam timber buildings in the city center. So basically this should be a case study and a showcase at the same time that this is possible.
Yeah, I think it's also really important because I've also talked to many real estate developers, and what they say is that they actually would really like to do a timber building, but it's well, the Excel just doesn't work out. It doesn't compute, yeah. So it's really quite well, and I was so happy to hear that in this densely populated city in urban context in Põlva, was it in Põlva? Yeah. Yeah. We already have like a timber building. But actually, this project is really now puzzling me because one thing I was also thinking about while hearing your presentation was that that who is the agent in this slender project? Because at the moment you're developing it because you have like a client, a real estate developer. But if you talk about it, it actually sounds like a community project. And many of these social housing or affordable housing projects, also these ones that were awarded this Mies van der Rohe Prize this year, they also were actually a community project. And from my point of view, I'm always analyzing that how could it be like a city project, or what is our agency in this in all of it. So it's really something also I think we can discuss later on, but I'm also now asking that, does anybody have any questions? Yes, please.
Well, I can ask from perspective. I studied in Finland, Tampere, and in our school we are very much, the teachers are focusing on CLT, teaching it, but we are very much focusing on of the restrictions, regulations, and coming from that, what's the current, and we're trying to learn to wiggle around it. But is it possible that to change regulations through one example? Like, so is the aim for you in the end actually change the law and the regulations in Estonia?
Yes.
I guess the aim is to prove otherwise, show good examples of how we can approach this differently, and how it doesn't have to be a solid housing block made out of timber. And in order to do that, we need to have studies on, for example, dual evacuation staircase. And the reason why is it's so slim is the fact that you can make the Põhjala facade to be cantilevering or only as thick as 1 meter according to Tallinn law. Yeah, it's Tallinn, it's not Estonia, by the way. So it's Tallinn law. So your facade could be 1 meter thick, or you can have a roof on top of you when you enter, like in the building entrance. It could be just 1 meter wide. So these things we are taking into account when we're, for example, figuring out how to make the facade inhabitable, or how to just to show what it could be so much more. Meaning that we don't have to be restricted by the ideas that fire escape routes have to be indoor or somewhere in a different location that we used to see that, so having like 2 cores or making the core out of concrete. We don't want to make a concrete core. And again, there's like any examples of this. So we need to find ways how to prove otherwise. So I guess the law is not going to be changed, but maybe we will just have like new tips and tricks in our pocket as an architect to start a new project with already a different mindset, hopefully. But Sarah, you said that in 2009 the social housing project in Italy is not that long, right? I mean, it started in 2009. So were there any rules that need to be bent or need to be changed when all this movement started?
We didn't change any law. We introduced a new regulatory for specific for social housing. That is something new for us. So there was a new law that define what is a social housing, that define the requisites to join social housing, that define that you can use the real estate funds to improve social housing, and define the integrated system of fund. but the other Italian law remain the same. I mean, they yes, the Italian law remain the same. The urban plane of this remain all the same. There was only some new law that define the concept of social housing.
Any more questions?
I actually have two questions. One is about separate walls between two apartments. Are they bare loading, or is it also possible, like, to make full from first floor till the last floor, like one big apartment without separated floors?
You're gonna have a helix building, so it could be a private house, 8-story private house. And so they are not load bearing. So the only outer facade and the internal core are actually the load bearing parts. And there are those glue lamp beams going across whenever there's this jump, the 1 meter jump between the slabs. That's where you have a glue lamp slab that actually makes the structural reinforcement. So you can't change where the jump is, the 1 meter jump, but you can change all the in-between walls there.
And the second question is maybe a little bit philosophical and also about the future of architecture. And according to the Frank Carey's slide that you had, the crumbling paper, and that these days are over, then in these days maybe the artists were seen as like the architects were seen as artists like Zaha Hadid and Frank Carey. But do you think that nowadays and in future times the architect's role is more like a system maker, as also like you do, that you're like providing the building bricks for different buildings and like modular buildings and so on? That is the architect's role, like from artists changing to a more functional way, and also, you know, like, is the social housing becoming a more bigger and bigger thing, and do architects follow more the function, or can they still be artists?
I think we are working much more with frameworks, or certain like span of possibilities rather than fixed digits. So basically, what I also focused my PhD on was how the narrative from an architect who crumbles the paper that is then handed over to engineer and then handed over to a constructor should be changed, and it should be much more into one constantly evolving and then changing system. And this thing, and I don't believe that it's all about the tools, but I think those tools can show us ways to think differently. So it's all about getting rid of the narrative approach from the idea to a building, but it's much more about being in the same, around the same common table. So I think it's much more about communicating, and you can't communicate only with words, but you have to give certain frames, like frameworks of how far it could go. So it's like defining your bounding boxes. And I think all of us, we could do that. So for example, with the pylon, we as an architects, we define it should be out of 4 elements only, like the minimum amount of elements in order to construct it out of timber. That it wasn't, but the idea was to show, like, have a minimum amount of joints inside of the structure, and everything else, or not everything else, but there was like a lot of other things that were still possible. But with those 4 sticks, you can play. I mean, this fox was dancing, right? So there was like thousands of different scenarios how it could stand, but it was then defined by an engineer, like how are the forces then regulated. So I think that there is a possibility for an architect to become much more of a communal, collaborative approach, but that it's much more form finding than form designing. And I think form finding is the parametric design. In a way, it is hanging the sandboxes or sandbags from the rope, because it gives you the holistic overall shape or network or metagrid or whatever it's called, but it gives you the idea of the output through the fact that you put the sandbox there where it's sandbag there where it's needed. And I think we as an architects, we have to think much more in this direction, like when and how and where and with whom to hang our sandbags.
Yeah, it's an interesting question of can architect still be an artist? But if I'm listening to you, I somehow, and I really like the project and how it's visualized and everything. But I still started to think that yeah, it's a community project, but actually it seems to me, or I feel that it's already so defined. So how, I understand that you already have like one owner who is willing to have this rooftop loft, but have you tested it somehow out also with like the possible renters, or have you had like discussion group with teachers that would they actually really like to live there? Because you're testing it out like theoretically, but have you had like any focus groups with possible renters or tenants?
First of all, I want to say about this specific case of the slender applied slender system is quite specific. It's in a concrete location that we know already what's going to be. But we're actually creating a matrix. We're creating a system that we need to once in a while push stop button and fix it in one location and show the case study of it, like how the system works applied in this condition. The next one will be totally different, as all the pilots are different, right? So I think this is defined to the fact that it actually has a client and it needs, and this system needs to be applied. It's just one taken out of the matrix. But now, but of course, there was this 8-story example. This 8-story example is much wider, bigger. So this we did in vacuum. So we did that in a vacuum condition, applying only Estonian laws. How many? So in Estonia you can construct currently 8-story timber buildings. You have a certain regulations of how many parking lots you have to have under, etc. So this is the vacuum of Estonian standards, laws and rules. And there's going to be hopefully more of them, and we want to show that how it's constantly adapting to the needs. And in that case, for example, the Krulli studio or the Krulli exhibition that I think you also saw, these were the same slender systems that we have sort of like investigated, and each student then took it and brought it to a totally different level. So they all looked totally different in terms of the approach of what's important for them. And I think the idea of how we bring the community or the context or different point of departures of what the architecture usually should have, how we bring them into a project is totally there. I think it has a certain flexibility, or actually a lot of flexibility, in order to be adapted and changed accordingly. So no, we don't have a finalized case study how it is to live in there. I do agree, maybe we should have put in the dream team also shrink, because might have been helpful. I think the closest we have gotten now is the facade prototype, where that you can see in the architecture museum.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. That I'm already like really inspired to go there and feel how it feels in a real
It's really squeezed though. It's like 55 centimeters, so you might need to walk with your like one side ahead. Yeah, this is something that we are also testing out, the spatial qualities that this Põhjala facade has.
I think we are already a bit over time. But Sarah, there was a last question I wanted to ask from you is that it's also about the context. And as much as I understand, you are choosing the already existing buildings, and at least what I saw from your slides was that they are often not, so to say, easy buildings. I don't know if they are somehow under protection. At least they seem to be like the old factory buildings, or like maybe buildings representing architectural styles that are not so valued nowadays. So what I wanted to ask is that how is it, or what are the difficulties, and how do you engage community in refurbishing those old houses? Or is it even a special goal for you to choose these kinds of buildings, or it just has somehow happened?
No, it's not exactly. I see that we avoid to use a new land because we have a lot of disused building in the center of our city. Sometimes we can demolish this building and rebuild completely new build. And other times we can't do this, but it's very difficult in English. We make an internal demolition, and remain the external part of the building. Sometimes remain also the floors, but we usually we change all the technical of the technical part. Cambiamo tutto, remain only the building.
The construction parts.
Yes. Yes. And the tenant is not involved in this space. We develop.
What is the role of the architect in your process? Is it like more like a technical role?
We use the architect and the engineer as in another the construction, and in the project phase, usually the architecture works together with the social manager or the property of the building, because the social manager is the person that needs that know the needs of the people, and give some information to the architects in order to design the best building for this particular kind of people. So now we are developing a lot of student housing, building for students, and we used to work together with the social manager of this student housing since to the beginning, since to the project phase, because the manager of the building, social manager of the building, know the needs of the young people, what the young people want to find the building, which are the common space that the young people needs. So we work together since the beginning. order to construct the best building for this specific kind of people.
Well, but thank you very much for presenting and being here in this round table with me, and thank you all very much for listening for almost those 2 hours. So I think the snacks are already eaten. I think we can enjoy the drinks from the bar.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was so interesting evening. It was so interesting to hear you and gather new ideas. And also thank you for the audience. It was so much pleasure to see you for so many people. And I hope you also gather some takeaways that you can use in your next projects. Okay?